Chapter 2. The Flaw. There remained only a few weeks till the fleet must sail, and in that time Elof had more than enough in hand to occupy every waking hour. Though the Eastlands had not, as Bryhane, lost the true smithcraft, the art had fallen into decline. Few smiths of any great ability had escaped there from Morven, and though many books of lore survived, fewer still were born able to make proper use of them. Certainly, there were none in these lands now to compare with the master-smiths of Norderney. Of these many had perished in the sack of that land, or in the hardships of the flight south, and with them great reserves of skill and learning had been lost. Only a handful had survived to come east, and some of those too old to do more than teach and oversee. It fell upon Elof to apportion the labors of the rest, and of such likely journeymen as he could find. What remained, he most often had to do with his own hand, and always when the utmost craft was called for. For whatever their degree of mastery, the mage smiths of either land were loath now to measure themselves against Elof Valantor, still young though he might be, and the craft they saw ablaze behind his strange-hued eyes. Yet the idea he had would not quit him, but grew and took shape even when he seemed to have forgotten it, like a serpent uncoiling in darkness. He lived in peace with Kara, and she never asked her cloak of him, but busied herself as much as he with preparations for the voyage. But the thought would come to his mind at odd moments, as he proved chain and tackle on the launching slips, or fashioned strong fastenings for sheet and hawser, and each time it would be that fraction clearer, that step more advanced. When he dwelt upon it too long, and upon its implications, it began subtly to disturb him. Then he at once forgot it again, because he had to. Right or wrong, it hardly mattered when he could not spare a tenth of the time he would need to make that thought real. Indeed, it might never have come to fruition if help had not arrived from an unexpected quarter. One chilly dawn, the clear note of a horn drifted up to the watch on the city's main gate. Elof, already making his way down the steep main street to the shipyards, saw them hasten to the windlasses and stayed to watch. The huge doors ground back in their sockets to reveal an extraordinary caravan. A cluster of hooded figures, short and square, who were leading a train of baggage beasts that looked like vast, shaggy hill goats. But Elof knew them for musk oxen from the mountains, and that only one folk could be leading them thus. He went racing down the slippery cobbles with his tool pack bouncing and jingling at his side. The caravan's leader looked up, hailed cheerfully, and came running to meet him also. Man and Duerg collided with a solid smack in the center of the road, and clung to each other as they threatened to fall over. A hood spilled off thick, dark curls, bright eyes, a flashing, breathless grin. With irresistible strength, two firm arms drew Elof's face down for a kiss as solid and smacking as their first encounter, and he hugged the girl tight, intensely aware of how different she felt from Kara, the hard, buxom breadth of her. Ilse, still breathless, pulled back a little too sharply, but then laughed as if to lighten her reaction. "Well then, young human, do I find you well?" She prodded him amiably in the midriff, and frowned. "On the thin side, even for a man." He smiled. "I've been busy this last week or two. More smith's work than we bargained for." "And is she seeing to it that you don't forget to eat? Well, I thought you might be running into a little trouble, so I've brought back some help." She gestured at her companions, busily goading the half-tamed and rebellious musk oxen into these unfamiliar surroundings. Smiths, all of them. Not the finest we have in the East by a long chalk, just middling. But I wanted them day-hardy, so they must needs be young. And with them a fine stock of finer ores, such as we've so far found in the old delvings. Ills, said Elof reverently, you're a marvel. Even middling Duergar smiths can strike sparks off our best men. And we've been too harried to go and hunt down new metals. He paused a moment, feeling the cold thought blossom in him once more. You wouldn't have any silver ore among your panniers, would you? Silver? Snorted Ills. Silver overflowing. Take it and welcome. We dwell among silver. We tangle nuggets in our river nets. We strike new seams with every old air shaft we open. Comes in handy for making new light mirrors. And we need 'em. Huge they are, these old workings, and twisty as a greased worm. Even our eyes need all the sun we can carry down. Even when you can capture sun and fire in your crystal lamps? She grimaced. Could we but craft them like that one in your gauntlet, we'd have less swink, aye. But we've not matched it. Not yet, she added hastily. Elof kept his face rigid. For all her friendship with men, Ills ran true to her race. Maybe when some more of our folk come east. He was careful to avoid offering his own help. You think they will? There've been few enough till now. We're a slower folk to change, Elof. Not like you mayfly men. They'll be watching and waiting to see how the first few have fared ere they took up roots that go back many 1,000 years. Even Ansker's of that mind. We've never before lived so openly around men. But now we've reopened the ancient mountain halls, and have some rich workings of our own to tempt them, away from human gaze. Aye, more'll come, and if they can't manage... She regarded him levelly and took a deep breath. Why then, Elof Valentor, you might teach us much. He blinked in astonishment, and with a wicked glitter in her eyes, she added, Never thought to hear that, did you? But I only said might, mind. Well, the sun's all but up. I'll have the silver sent over to the Hall of Guild in the noontide, and my lads when they've rested. Right now, I want some breakfast. So we'll go pay our respects at the palace, though it's plain enough eating there, in all conscience. A note of amused affection crept into her voice. How fares the long lad, by the by? Elof smiled. Still king, driving himself harder than any servant, and looking well on it. But all the better for seeing you, I've no doubt. Rock's down south in Pendyra port on business for him, but he's due back within the week. And your lady? She's well as ever, thank you. Elof was sure he had spoken naturally. He had taken pains to. But he was suddenly uncomfortably aware of Ilse's piercing dark gaze. But all she said, equally naturally, was, So? I'm glad to hear it. That we've traveled these hard hills before won't make them the less perilous. We'll be happier, having her with us. She hesitated a moment then, before adding, Take good care of her, Elof. She is a rare creature. He nodded, knowing that her concern was not for Kara. I intend to, Ilse. Believe me, I do. Thus it was the coming of the Duergar smiths that left him free to put his purpose into effect. and how matters might have gone otherwise, none can say. That afternoon, when he had sent them about the many tasks he had in hand, he found himself suddenly with a little time to spare. Quitting the great forge that was his in the vaults of the ancient halls of the Smiths' Guild, he strolled along wide corridors that rang and chimed with the strokes of heavy hammers, roared with the breath of bellows and furnace. The weighty hangings that were mounted over the walls of smooth stone to deaden these echoes had long since darkened to a sooty black. He mounted the wide stairs into cleaner air and quieter, past the newly refurbished libraries and scholars' rooms to the upper floors, in whose smaller chambers the master jewelers and fine artificers kept their workshops. Here the din echoing along the walls was shriller, swifter, a tingling and chiming of light hammers and fine instruments against rare metals and gems. Here it was the acrid stench of solders, corrosives, and cleaning pickles that tainted the air, the hangings stained and faded, and in places charred or withered through. At a high window a bent old master-smith, surrounded by a gaggle of black-garbed apprentices, was demonstrating a delicate instrument, explaining the virtues of orientation and steadiness worked into its metals. Elof nodded to them as he passed, thinking back to his own apprentice days. He knew the device, an aid to navigation made to determine very precisely the elevation of sun, moon, and stars. He wished devoutly that some instrument might measure as minutely the courses of their steerers. He paused before a tall door of hardened oak, marked with a name in fine laced silver, knocked lightly, and entered at the muffled summons. A lean woman of about his years looked up from the gilded chalice she was burnishing. Her large eyes widened further. "Good day, master." She rose awkwardly from her bench, but he motioned her back with a smile. "And to you also, master. Don't let me disturb it." She smiled hesitantly, brushing brown locks back from her forehead. A nervous gesture, it seemed. He knew from Rock that Marja was always nervous in his presence, yet she looked at him with the eyes of a fellow smith. "My errand should devour little of your precious time, a minor matter upon which I would know the mind of a master jeweler, one whose craft is turned so closely to adorning the body. Why, think you, of all the noble metals, or which, think you, of all the noble metals, has the greatest affinity with the body, with human flesh and blood?" Marja subsided slowly onto her bench, her face already slackening with the distraction of thought. "Why, gold, I suppose many would say. That is the tradition, anyhow. For the softness of it, they say, and the seeming warmth." Elof sat down in front of her. "And you?" he prompted. I am not of that mind, not wholly. Less so since I read some scholars of the old Eastlands here. For the greatest affinity might you not need to look beyond metals altogether? To some of those odd stuffs the ancient master-smiths made, akin to metal in their properties, but more malleable. She knitted her fingers with enthusiasm. "There was a tale old Joran told me once, of the stuff that was spun from the very stuff of life itself, living matter reduced to its ultimate pure ash, and was stronger than any metal, lighter too. It was one of the heroic mage-smiths of Morven made it, I remember, or of Karis even. Arv, or Aluki Three-Finger, or Vade. Somebody like that." Elof grinned. "I know. Milo told me of that too." Make good tales to fire apprentices with, don't they? Sets them dreaming of discovering such wonders for themselves. But the secret of that strong stuff is lost, if it ever existed, and none of the others we know of will serve. No, it has to be metal. She had grown nervous again. Well, then, it is a subtle point on which few can be certain, but whatever tradition says, I would choose silver. Elof nodded with slow satisfaction. I thought you might, in your hard-won wisdom. Tradition once had it that women did not make good smiths also. She flushed at the compliment. It's that the warmth of gold is an illusion. It can be a barrier to heat in many instances. And as for being soft, well, flesh is soft, but it holds its shape, and there's bone beneath. And the bone setters? They come to a smith's, do they not, for alloys of silver, plates and pins of it to join and patch shattered or splintered bones. The bone may well grow out around them with little hurt. The flesh and skin heal over them. A hardened silver will endure the fluids of the body better than any metal, save some special steels. And those hard to make and harder to fashion, save perhaps for the Duergar, she added ruefully, or yourself. Elof grinned and shook his head. For armory, perhaps, not for fine tasks. Silver is subtler, as you say, readier to take fine shape upon itself, and deep craft. But of course, to maintain the affinity, it need not be set within the body. Marja smiled. Hardly. Though I have found serviceable a setting in some way symbolic of the union. A zoning, say, an encirclement, a girdle, a necklace, an arm ring. She hesitated. Evidently she had heard something of that, from Rock or from Kara herself. But Elof only chuckled, putting her at ease again. That indeed! Though I was but apprentice when I crafted Kara's, and used gold at my master's behest, there was one who lacked the woman's insight. But for yours, I thank you, and leave you to your tasks. I was half of your mind on a difficult point, and now you've settled it well. A word of Rock? Well, he should not be long now. Again, a good day to you, master. She looked at him a little curiously as he took his leave, but made no move to ask him why he had asked what he had. It was common for master smiths to be secretive about their work, especially in its earliest stages, and to pry would be a grave breach of manners as the guild understood them. That would not stop her thinking, but she, only recently made master, would hardly be likely to guess at his true purpose. He himself had been slow enough to conceive it. Even now he balked at it, half yearned to let that thought remain a thought. But then consuming fear came upon him all the more strongly, and a great horror at the thought of abandoning Kara to the cold mind, dark heart that had first ensnared her. Should he let that happen when he might so easily prevent it? How could he live with himself if he did? The prentices, still taking sights with their instruments, turned to greet him as he passed, but fell silent. He saw his look mirrored in their dismay, and turned it to a rueful smile. Back once more in his forge, he sat gazing at the panniers of ore left him by Ilse's fellows, picking out chunks and turning them over in his fingers. Silver was among those metals that could be seen clearly even in its natural state. His knowing fingers traced the threads and streaks with which the living rock was shot, as if they were its veins and nerves. And was not that another affinity with the living? It remained for him now to render it, concentrate it, distill the essence of this stony flesh, and set within it. Once more his mind shied at the thought, and once more that iron purpose, forged by fear, tempered by desperation, goaded it to its crucial leap. He roused himself, went to the door to call in apprentices from the training forge nearby, then stopped. The fewer hands that mingled in this work, the better, for many reasons. With all his strength, he heaved the first pannier from the ground and began to tip the ore into the crushing trough. When all was done, he spun a heavy bar pivoted in the stone wall, and water came gushing from a metal chute above, swirling the loose dirt from the chunks and herding them slowly down the trough towards the iron block at the end. As the flow quickened, he lowered into it a tall, flanged wheel set in a framework among levers, and two heavy shafts tipped at their end with iron blocks as big as his head, shaped to bite against the iron below. The levers worked as the wheel spun, lifting and letting fall the shafts, catching and crushing the ore between iron and iron. The shattered pieces ground to finer fragments as they passed beneath the center of the wheel, a hub of hard stone. Retreating from the noise, Elof smiled in satisfaction. He had adapted this engine from those in the forge of the master-smith Mylio, and if it was smaller, driven by Morvenhall's ducted water supply, and not a mountain torrent, it was also subtler and less cumbersome. One day, perhaps, if he needed more power, he might harness the pounding of the waves below, or, as some smiths had of old, the contained and perilous force of heated steam. But not even that could match the blast of the earth fires by which the master-smith's furnaces were fed, and which, at times, he missed most sorely in his work. The Duergar might have helped him harness them, but there were simply no such fires near enough the surface in this rolling seacoast region. Smith lore had taught him that nature held many other sources of great heat, from the sun's gathered light to the inner turbulence of certain metals subtly purified, but also how hard they were to tap, how perilous. For one brief minute of wonder and terror, he had trapped the lightning in his fist, and seen how small man stood against the compass of such forces. To draw upon the least of them would require long study, and though he had bent some time to his researches, always some matter of greater urgency had intervened, and always there was Kara. He had ideas, but as yet he was far from any answer. He rose and busied himself about his furnace. Water drove the bellows. Behind the panel of sooty mica in the door, their glow changed from red to glaring yellow in the blast, and thence to a core of dazzling white about the foot of the crucible he had thrust in. The coals sizzled and sang, and as he watched the little pyramid of crushed ore slump and trickle inward, he caught the note of the singing, rising and falling, and found within it, as visions are seen in hearth fires, the music of songs. One, ringing and compulsive, he knew well, though from where he could not say. The other was something new, quite new, a slower, lilting, flowing phrase that seemed to lead him on to others. That was good, that the song sung over this work should arise out of it, one upon another, phrases that grew and burgeoned like twinning flowers. Should flowers also be the starting point of the pattern he must set upon his work? But there might be something better, something closer. He ran his fingers idly over the blocks of fine beeswax he had set out, humming vague snatches of tunes, seeking for the shape they suggested within the amber depths of the wax. For a moment, forgetting the array of knives and carving tools beside it, he plucked up a long, thin block and, warming it at the furnace wall, began to work it between his fingers. It flowed and responded under his powerful grasp. "Even so," he muttered, "even this, you learn well what you must do. Your proper pattern you shall have." And that night, as the stars wheeled beyond their balcony and Kara tensed and flowed beneath him amid the tangle of their sheets, he ran his hands through her crisp hair, forcing her head back to kiss her fluttering throat. He had meant to grip lightly, but in the force of his passion, his hands clenched tight, and when they fell away, trembling, they grasped a whole wisp of her hairs, not the single one he had need of. But this they could smile at, for he in turn bore the impress of her nails upon his back, sharp as talons. Later, when she slept, he padded over to the chest where her cloak was bestowed, unlocked it, and very softly raised the lid. There lay the cloak, gleaming so white in the faint light that when he lifted one corner, the blackness of the lining seemed absolute, and he had to riffle the little feathers with his fingers to find their roots. At last he chose one, inconspicuous, yet near the garment's edge, caught it between finger and thumb, and plucked it loose. There was a sudden, slight gasp, and to his horror, he heard Kara whimper in her sleep, looked up and saw her, curled up on her side, straighten out suddenly and reach up to rub at one shoulder. He felt moisture on his fingers, a slight warm stickiness he could not mistake, and froze unmoving where he knelt. But her eyes did not open. Her arm fell away onto her breast, and she slipped back once more into sleep. When he dared move again, he reached down, caught the cloak between his fingers. Beneath the feathers he felt some fine silken fabric against the outer cloak. No more. He folded it back carefully into the chest, smoothing it with what was almost a caress, and quietly locked the lid once more. He rose shakily to his feet, sick with self-disgust, half-minded to hurl away the feather and the hairs he clutched, sticky with a spot of drying blood. But instead, he forced himself to tuck them into the fold of cotton he had laid ready, and returned it to the aumbry. Then, clambering back into bed, he reached out almost desperately to Kara. Sleepily she came to him and clung, and he buried his face in the warmth of her shoulder. Had she awoken then, he might still have blurted out what was on his mind. But sleep held her fast as any human. So it overtook Elof also, and so the first light woke them, to love again half sleeping, and in loving, forget. By the coming of the day, Elof's doubts had receded like a troubled dream, and it was easy to blame the blood on one of his own smarting scratches. The next day, in between his official duties, he set about further extracting the pure silver from the reduced ore by amalgamating it with quicksilver, a subtle but hazardous process. Only after there was no further chance of fumes could he bolt the doors of his forge and lay out his prizes upon a scrubbed, clean workbench, guarding against the least draught that might snatch them away. For a while, he toyed with them, setting the lock of hair and the feather together in various ways till he had an arrangement that pleased him. He chalked a quick sketch of it upon a slate, multiplied it to form a frieze, then drew the frieze in various perspectives, in circles, rings, spirals. And it was as he completed the spiral design that he found himself humming again, those first faint serpentine phrases of the new song, ever more clearly. A spiral. He took up the shape he had already made. A flowing spiral of feathers interwoven with locks of hair, winding forever onward, but winding about a torus, and so coming forever back upon itself. Free, yet unchanging. Forever fleeing, yet forever returning. He nodded to himself. It would take great care, but it could be done. He scrubbed his crude sketch from the slate, took up ink and parchment pieces, and set to work constructing a large and intricate version of the design. It took him many hours and several false starts, and all the while singing softly to himself. The floor around him was littered with discarded sheets, and when he had at last finished, he was careful to gather these and thrust them into the forge. The parchments curled and whined and sizzled like living things upon the hot coals, but he scarcely noticed. His hands were already upon the wax, probing its smooth contours with a burin finer than the finest of the hairs it would portray. By now it was late at night, but for all his distrust of wearied mind and hands, he labored on, driven as he had not been since his youth, singing still under his breath, hardly aware of it. It was not easy work, for the glabrous wax was not parchment to be inscribed, nor wood to be chiseled clean. Any mark caused its surface to swell and change. It might flake away where it was too brittle, or ooze where it was soft. Every stroke had to be incised with care and foresight, its shavings minutely cleaned away before the next. Flat lines had to be translated into incised channels or raised ridges, and the tapering of the hairs, the fine fluff at the feathers' bases, represented. Even the dark stain on the quill he sought to match by subtle texture. It was master's work, and in the mere precision of its detail it was fair. As if already there is something of her in it, he thought, and was pleased. Yet that pleasure only sharpened the spurs of fear. On and on he labored, till he found the delicate tools slipping between fingers sweating or numbed. Many times he managed to avoid damaging the work only at the cost of cuts and punctures, and it was his own blood made them slippery then. When at last some shred of sane caution told him to lay down the thing he held, to get it free of his trembling fingers before he ruined it, he felt almost sick with frustration. Only little by little did reason reassert itself as he hobbled back up towards the palace under skies whose stars were already beginning to pale. He told himself angrily that it was too easy to become obsessed with lonely work like this. Easier still to ruin it with impatience. Yet he still could not be sure he would find Kara there awaiting him, that he would not find the chest broken, the cloak gone, and nothing save perhaps a black quill left him as a token. Along high stair and vaulted passage his thoughts haunted him, and though his relief at finding her curled beneath the covers, her hair a dark corona amid the white pillows, was great enough, it barely lasted him into sleep, and fled with waking. On the next day he hurried through his duties in the shipyards like a man possessed. That carving haunted him like a persistent irritation, an itch in his mind. Even when he found himself dangling head down from a masthead to free a salt-encrusted block, rather than reeve a whole new set of tackle, he could not stop running over and over the patterns in his mind until they made him dizzy. He swung himself upright on the little platform, and to avoid looking straight down to the deck, he glanced out across the harbor, enjoying the cool breeze and the look of the town in late afternoon. Down here, walls were mostly half-timbered and lime-washed, or timbers laid clinker fashion and painted very much like those of his childhood village. Many had been repainted after the ravages of winter, and garlanded with flowers in hanging baskets and window shelves. They looked bright as toys clustered around the feet of the more august buildings of the upper town, in their rich shades of red and yellow stone. But inevitably, somehow, his glance was drawn across the lower rooftops again, towards the dark bulk, itself a little like a lowering anvil, that was the hall of his guild. His sight seemed to pierce through those walls and down towards those half-formed secrets they held. He cursed. The joy had gone out of the scene for him. The irritation had infected it, too. He hated what he was doing, yet it would not let him be. Moodily, he lobbed the useless block into a cluster of seagulls bobbing on the harbor waters and watched them explode upwards, cursing and squalling just as he wanted to. Then he shrugged guiltily. It would not have amused Kara, that. One of them might even have been Kara, if he had not. Very slowly he inched out along the shrouds and slid down with gloved hands. His duty was done for the moment. He could get back to his carving once more. By late evening it was complete. Carved surfaces more detailed and more delicate than any he had ever made till now. The living lock and feather he took and set among the patterns, and save for the hues of life, they were matched to perfection. He laid them apart, then swiftly turned to preparing the molds, lest in the warmth of the forge the wax should soften further and lose some tiny point of definition. By that much might its power be lessened. By so much might he lose what he fought to preserve. It was with the gentleness of love that his practiced fingers worked a soft slip of burnt and powdered chalk about the delicate shapes he had made, to take the finest possible impress of the pattern. Over that he smoothed layer upon layer of clay, gradually firmer, till at last the prepared shapes could be maneuvered gently into position in his molding flasks, sprues carefully aligned with the openings, then encased and set to dry well away from the forge hearth and the furnace, lest the sudden heat should crack them. Now he brought the water thundering down, washed the clay from his stinging cuts, and set the bellows wheel spinning till the breath of the bellows roared through the coals like buried dragons. Then, with long tongs, he set the crucible of purified silver among them, and several of other rare metals for his chosen alloy. He sat by the maw of the furnace, humming idly under his breath, and watched its dulled surface gradually shiver with remembered heat and change into a flowing mirror. He remembered his tumble-down smithy among the salt marshes, these 10 years behind him, and the breadth of a land away, and the silver wires he had worked there for a sword hilt. Believing his craft lost to him, he had not sought to set within them any virtues, and yet they had absorbed something of his essential self and shown it him as an image of the marshland skies. A rushing of gray clouds, a sweep of rain and storm. Now he must make this silver do likewise, save that now he would determine the image, and the essence would not be his own. He began to sing to himself quietly, vague snatches of that new song, wordless still, or with only a single word, yet heavy with a meaning that was growing continually clearer. Firing the molds, he felt a chain of words take shape in his mind as the wax rushed molten from the sprue holes, spitting and flaming onto the coals, and after it the boiling water to clean them. He sat them at the edge of the fire and took a deep breath. Then he lifted the glowing crucible to the furnace door, and one by one in careful order, tipped in the lesser metals. Some were to make the silver harder and more durable, some to add a slight spring to it, but others, added in merest traces, were to bear special virtues of their own. The heavy liquid hissed and seethed sluggishly as he stirred it with a long rod of steel, and all the while, listening carefully to the thin, high note of the coals, he sang the chant that had come to him. That swirling rhythm went well with the stirring, and the coils it awoke in the crucible's heart. In silver the shaping, enclosing, embracing, in silver a shield, ring of signs interlacing, set firm within silver the circle shall close. In silver the melting, in silver the blending, as ramparts of steel shut with moonlight defending. No call from without them may pass what they hold. Tiny droplets of metal spattered his hand. The rod grew hot through the rag he held it by. The furnace heat drew the skin taut over his cheekbones, cracked his lips, stung his eyes, yet still he sang, dry-tongued, till the last part of the alloy was added and the blend complete. As freely you flow now, a form shall enfold you, in cooling, coalescing, a pattern shall hold you, in shaping and firming, grow strong, yet grow fair. What now I trust to you, embrace it, enfold it, yet against yearning for change, against wandering, hold it, in case as in armor the heart that is torn. With frantic speed he threw his weight upon the great forge bellows, pumping them faster than could the water wheel, till the hill of coals glowed searing white at its summit, as if earth fires fed it indeed. Urgently he heaved out the crucible in the long tongs, white-hot metal slopping and sizzling against its flanks, and whirled it across from furnace to forge. It seemed to leave a trail like a falling starstone in the heavy air, and hissed onto the angry coals. The lock of hair and the feather he caught up, raised them to his lips a moment, then reached out over the fire to the crucible and dropped them in. A light plume of flame danced up, ghost-like, and they were gone. Gathering his strength, he took up the crucible once more, swung it around to the molds waiting on the forge rim, then cursed himself luridly. Fool that he was to try such a task without one forge hand at least, to steady the mold, to correct his aim, to vibrate out airlocks and bubbles, to warn him when it was almost full. Hideous difficulties loomed over him. One mistake, one only. There was no help for it now. Delay would only cool the silver further, make it harder to pour. He would have to reheat it, risk dissipating what he had set within it. And would he ever dare to replace it? Better at all events to have no forge hand hear what he must sing now. Gritting tooth on tooth, he tilted the heavy thing, saw a swelling of red at its rim, a fine thread falling, straight into the mouth of the mold. Steam whistled from the other sprue hole. He breathed again, and on that note he sang, clear and fierce, that older song his memory had taught him. Yet the words were new, and as he sang his hand never trembled. The thread of falling silver never wavered. Sheltered in silver by craft and by flame, be no more now drawn from me and captive again. As once you chose, choose to remain. Your own self shall enclose you more firmly than fetter or chain. Silver sprang and spat, and he swung the crucible away. But was the mold full, or was it only an airlock which would leave a damaging flaw? Too late to tell. Already the mirrored meniscus was dimming. He must pour the other quickly before the silver cooled. This was worse, his arms aching with cramp, his fingers trembling with weakness. His head swam, but he sang the words clearly through the smoky air. A long age it seemed before the silver leaped and spattered down the flanks of the second mold, and so great was his relief that he all but dropped the crucible, and had to set it down at an awkward angle on the rim before coaxing the molds gently out of the coals. Even unshaped, that silver could be potent stuff. He would be safest making some other work of it as soon as possible, set with different virtues. Meanwhile, he left the molds on top of the coals to cool slowly as they did. That helped lessen stresses within the metal. Exhaustion burned in his back and arms, and suddenly the air choked him. He flung the air vents wide and collapsed by the forge, listening to the wind sigh in the passages of the stone. His head drooped on his breast. He jerked upright once, and then it no longer seemed worth the effort. His eyes were hot and sore. His head. Thunder crashed around him. Suddenly he was in many places, on a storm-wreathed tower top, a grim and night-bound forest, by a forge in a marshland hovel. Or was it in the mountains of the north? Then he knew where he was, shivering by a stone-cold hearth, with pounding upon his doors. Speechless, he stumbled up, his throat ashen as the forge. Something in his dreaming, a memory of other such summons, filled that sound with dread, made his hands clumsy on the heavy bolt. For a moment, the figure that stood there in the shadowy corridor, cloaked and hooded, seemed ominous. But he was shorter than Elof, short and rotund, and from beneath the travel-stained hood blazed a mane of red hair. Elof forgot all his alarm and seized the proffered hand. "Rock, my lad! So you're back, then?"
"Sorta looks that way, don't it?"
grunted Rock gracelessly. Elof looked at him narrowly. Though Rock was nominally a guildsman, he was seldom seen in the halls. There was no mystery about that. In the Southlands, he had been a respected master of his art. But what status had a smith here, skilled as he might be in the mechanics of his trade, who lacked the least trace of true smithcraft? The short man grimaced.
"You're the only waking soul in the place. And here's me just in the gate. All the hostelry is still shut up snug for the dawn. And me too dry with the dust of 20 roads to make the climb up to the palace."
Elof took the hint, and poured them both wine from a jug on a side table. Rock downed his in one gulp, and held the beaker out for more.
"Not bad," he wheezed. "Distinctly passable, in fact, though the suits got into it again. Don't your forge boy keep it covered up?"
Elof peered suspiciously into his own goblet. "I don't keep a forge boy anymore. I get the prentices in to help as I need them." Rock snorted.
"No wonder place is a mess, then. I've half a mind to take up my old post again. You're not fit to look after yourself. What's this that's got you out of your bed so early?"
He glanced at Elof from beneath his bristling brows.
"Or kept you out of it all night, huh? My, must be something good and juicy."
He squinted at the small molds, into the cold crucible.
"Silver? Not stuff for the fleet, surely?"
"Hardly," smiled Elof. "That's day labor. This is to be a gift, a surprise, so not a word of it, even to Marja."
"Scant danger of that," grunted Rock. "Smithcraft's not a thing we talk about, jewelry least of all. Well, these molds look about ripe for cracking. Want a hand?"
"If you're not too weary," grinned Elof, striving not to let his misgivings show. But it would be a worse risk being seen to hide anything from Rock. He was no fool. And since he could see nothing of the craft within the metal, what harm was there? His stubby hands were every bit as deft as Elof's as they prized apart the metal shells and chipped at the crumbling clay within. Below lay the chalk, sintered now to the hardness of the rock it came from. But under Elof's impatient grip, its edges flaked away, and he shelled it like some strange fruit, catching his breath at the gleams of bright metal that showed through. He brought down a jar of corrosive from the high shelf and mixed a weak solution in water.
"So,"
said Rock, as they watched the chalk fizz and bubble away, revealing the clear outlines of the pieces.
"Not bad. Not bad at all. Neat as Marja could manage, or any other master jeweler I know. But that's no surprise. They the way you wanted them, then?"
With great care, Elof hooked the gleaming pieces out of the cleansing bath, ran them a moment beneath the water chute, and held them up, first to the red-tinged Duergar lantern, then to the thin light that was filtering down the air shafts. "Yes," he breathed, seeing the intricate pattern of lock and feather wind its way around them without the tiniest flaw or bubble to break its inexorable course. "Yes, they are. Indeed they are." They set a catch in his voice, for he had the true smith's love of all things harmonious and fair. Yet not only their perfection moved him, but the sight of the shimmers and flickers that to his eye darted this way and that in the metal, like fish below clear ice. With a friend's privilege, Rock reached up and plucked down one of the gleaming things, like rare fruit.
"Bracelets, huh? But why open like that?"
Elof smiled. "Anklets, rather."
I see. So they'll fit over the foot. But won't they need hinges?"
"No. The natural spring of the metal." Rock nodded, and his powerful fingers closed around the thick ring of silver, narrowing the split. "No!" barked Elof, and wrenched the fair thing from his hand. Rock raised his eyebrows mildly, and Elof smiled in apology. "After it's annealed, I was going to say. A long, slow heating and cooling to heal any inward stresses."
"All right," grunted Rock. "I wasn't going to risk closing it all the way anyway. Guessed you'd be wanting to work on the catch. Can't see how it'd undo as it is."
Elof shrugged. "It's important they stay on securely." Rock grinned in wry agreement.
"Fair enough. She's an active girl, your Kara. More active than most. You'd be wanting anything you gave her to fit close and stay close, all right."
Elof relaxed, trying not to show how shaken he had been. How vital it was that those clasps should close only at the right time and place, and in no other. It was a fell thing he had shaped here, in its way, but there was no help for it. He had only to think of her drawn back to Lohi's clutches to make it all worthwhile again. He balanced the anklets in his palm, and was startled to see blood on the metal. It was his. He had reopened some of the worst cuts when he snatched the thing back. Well, on the outside of the piece it could do no harm. He turned to wipe it away on a clean rag. Then he froze. On the outside? But he had paid little heed to his injuries earlier in the work. He could have bled at any point. Onto the wax, into the silver, the tokens. He could have added his own blood to that feather. There was no way he would ever be able to tell.
"What's amiss with you now?" grunted Rock. "You've a face on you the color of milk, and sour at that."
It's nothing. Just an effect. One that might turn out good or bad. I have no idea." He choked down his sudden flood of anxiety. There was always slight contamination when you touched something. A flake of skin, its natural oils. That mattered little, so why should this? And after all, Could he really be bound up any more closely with Kara than he was? Might even strengthen the thing. He smiled wearily. I was really wondering. I've a fair amount of silver left that I'd like to find a use for. Do you have any notions? Rock fingered his stubbled chin.
Not just now, but then my mind's that muzzy. I've not slept. Something to help us on our jaunt south. That's a good an idea as I can hatch right now. Me for the palace, and some breakfast. And a bath. They should have the bathhouse warming nicely by the time I get there. You could use one after your labors. Set you up? Coming?
Elof considered a moment. Why not? But hear me. If Kara is there also, not a word of the gift, remember. He shut away the anklets in a secure cabinet of iron, and closed up the forge with as much care. Then they went together out of the guild halls and into the winding straits of the Northerners' Quarter, at whose heart the great building stood. A light spring rain was falling, making the scale-tiled house roofs shine, gurgling out of the open-mouthed dragon heads at their gable ends, or running in sheets down their wall timbers, cocked tight as ships with the figures brightly limed in red and black upon them. Little rivulets chattering down between the cobbles into the central gutter. Rock looked at the ships rolling at anchor, and up at the ornate weather vanes on the house roofs, and groaned.
Wind swinging about around the compass again. Clear dawn when I came in. Ah, well, that's spring for you. That'll give us an interesting time at sea, that will. Just like always.
Elof grinned sympathetically. Rock was unhappily weak of stomach in a lively sea. You know, he remarked, watching the vanes creak back and forth over the tiles, that was no bad thought of yours. Something to help on the voyage indeed. I'll think on that. And so he did, even as they took their ease in the royal baths, stretching out weary limbs on the steam room slabs, and drifting in the heated pools. His mind dwelt on it still. Then friends and fellow courtiers came to join them, and later Marja and Kara, and the demands of the day took over his thoughts. His other, deeper concern he forgot entirely for that time, the matter of the blood. Yet, in the years to come, he had cause to remember it, and wonder if this petty accident might indeed have played a strange part in his fortunes. For to the effects of true smithcraft, say the annals of that day, it was ever hard to put any bounds, and never more so than in the hands of Elof, called Valentor. From that day forth he had in any case little leisure for thought. The day of departure was near, and his was the ultimate responsibility for all the work his helpers, men and Duergar, had made ready. What spare time he had, he devoted to reforging the extra silver. He would leave nothing so perilous behind to suffer the whim of chance. This work was less subtle, for the forces of nature might be stronger than the turning tides of heart and mind, but it cost him much hard labor in sizing its pattern with mauls and chisels, and beating down an inlay of gold wire into the troughs thus made. He had chosen the complex pattern, coiling and intertwining in the Southland style, that represented Amicak, the sea devourer, embodiment of the terrors of the oceans. But it represented also their regality and strength, and as such it was the favorite emblem of the boldest corsairs, and fitted his purposes well. From time to time he would sing snatches of old fishermen's shanties he remembered from his youth in Assenby village. songs chiefly concerned with summoning fine weather and catches, simple but strong. More often, though, he whistled hard between his teeth as he worked, recalling the pipe whistles the sea-wise smiths of Norderney used to forge for mariners to summon up the breeze. And as often happened to him, a work he had started casually took hold of him, and ere it was finished he had set within it a surprising craft and strength. Such was the turmoil of those last days that he could not finish it till the very eve of the fleet's departure, checking its balance carefully on its steel mounting, and giving it a last buff and polish. It only remained for him then to gather up the tools he always traveled with, and close up his forge for the summer. Last of all, he took the anklets from their cabinet and thrust them into an inner pocket. Then he locked the doors behind him and hurried out and into the ways leading up to the palace. Seeing the sun was almost down, that night Kermorven was feasting all the mariners of the fleet, some 2,000 in all, at a great banquet of state that would fill all the wide halls of the palace, and he should attend. Not that it mattered much if he was late, but Kara might be anxious. As it was, they managed to make their entrance a few minutes before the king himself took his seat. Till then, the center of attention had been Ilse, queenly in white among her guard of thick-set Duergar. But Elof was uncomfortably aware of all eyes turning to Kara, for the beauty of her and the mystery, garbed in a gown of forest green and set about with the jewels he had made her. "Do you hear them stir down there at the cruise tables?" she whispered as they took their seats at the high table. "Do you know why? Folk from the west or the remote townlets, who have not seen me ere now, they turn to their neighbors and whisper, 'Is that not she, the strange one, the shape-shifter that he took from the Ice Witch? What is she in truth, and what is he, that he loves such a one?'" Elof chuckled, "And their wiser neighbors will answer that if they cannot see good reason, they must be blind, or fish-blooded. And for your inner self, they'll cite the courage you showed in freeing their king, the ways you've helped us on our journeys, scouted for us, healed for us, fought for us." "For you," she said quietly, clutching his hand beneath the table. And then to a flourish of music Kermorven entered, and as one the crews rose to cheer and stamp. He acknowledged the rowdy tribute with a quiet nod and a lifted hand, and moved smiling to take his place between Ilse on his right hand and Kara on his left. The feast began then, and it was a merry one, though neither long nor drunken. Kermorven wanted his crews fit on the morrow, and would have a severe way with any who were not. It was well before the middle hours when Elof and Kara made their way back to their apartments. As Kara laid aside her jewels, Elof opened the chest, took out the cloak, and made as if to drape it around her shoulders. But her own strong hands held his wrists, and she shook her head, smiling. "Do you keep it for me still? Pack it among your own gear, and give it me only at need. Take it back when that is past. I would not add to your worries on such a voyage as this." Elof's mouth quirked. He understood only too well that she was paying him back, very gently, for having asked it of her. He put aside the cloak and drew her to him, and the anklets he left in his pockets, without a further thought. But on the next day's dawning, when they went aboard the longship Prince Corentin, flagship of the fleet, at its anchorage in mid-harbor, Elof had his other work ready to hand. Kara, bare-legged, swung through the boarding port with a lithe grace. He clambered unsteadily after her, while the wherrymen swayed up their heavy packs to the deck. Together they made their way aft to the stern castle, where stood Kermorven, directing the disposition of his fleet. His clear voice was ragged and cracking with the effort of shouting orders. Messengers scurried this way and that about the gently heaving deck, and the signal flags fluttered like bright butterflies in the crowded harbor. He had no more than a glance to spare for the newcomers, and that of relief. They were the last aboard, for Elof had been carrying out some final refitting aboard other vessels. Already aboard with the king was Rock, and also Ilse, as she often was in these days. That was natural enough, in that she also was a ruler, seeking to establish and extend her realm in the Meneth Lendenin, and was hoping to bring many more of her folk eastward on this expedition. Only Elof, who had once by chance overheard a strange conversation, was inclined to wonder what more might lie behind this, and he kept his own counsel. She was leaning on the rail now, squinting in the morning light, regarding the confusion with her wide, sardonic grin. It broadened, if anything, when she saw Elof and Kara, and she waved them lazily over. Scurry, scurry, scurry. Everyone's rushing about at the behest of their feelings, too busy to stop and think. That's men for you. Or humans. Eh, Lady Kara? Elof stiffened slightly. He was very fond of Ilse. But what she thought of Kara he had never been sure, and this stress on humanity made him uncomfortable. In many ways, Kara was more human than the Duergar, and knew it. But Kara only smiled and took Elof's arm. I find they have some uses, both of them. What's amiss here? Ilse jerked a stubby thumb at the sternpost, where a gilded wind vane in the shape of a gull creaked to and fro, swinging with each slight shift of the ship. The wind, it would seem, a few points short of favorable by the look of it. So we are windrowed, with scant space to maneuver. The small craft think they will clear the harbor mouth close-hauled. The larger longships and dromons fear they cannot. It is hard to be sure.
And getting them out under oars could take all day,
said Rock uneasily.
We could miss the wind and sit wallowing for hours.
He looked somewhat green already. Elof nodded, stepped forward, and tapped Kermorven unceremoniously on the shoulder. Would it help you to have a true gauge of the wind? He called out against the breeze. Would it not? Snapped the tall man over his shoulder, brushing his bronzen hair out of his eyes. Why, can you shape us such a thing in time? It would help us to know whether to risk sail. Elof reached into his pack. I was going to give you this today anyway, as a luck gift for the journey. He handed the glittering quarter moon of metal to Kermorven. His brows lifted as he looked at it. Then he grinned to Elof. Amicak, huh? Well, we've sailed under his sign before, you and I. It shouldn't hurt us to play the Corsair again. He reached up to the carved sternpost and lifted the golden gull from its socket. Into its place he slid Elof's vane. The raised finial that was the head of the pattern gleamed gape-jawed to the wind. Once it takes the wind properly, called Elof hopefully, it should hold it tight with every twist and turn. He watched it saw from side to side a little, just like its predecessor. Then, there! The vane had stopped sharply, quivering slightly, gripped as if by vast hands in the dead center of the wind. Remarkable, said Kermorven, even though its tidings are not hopeful. What if it were pushed out of line? Elof shrugged. It should center itself once more, but it should not be so easily shifted. Curiously, Kermorven reached up and pushed at the blade of the vane. It did not move. He pressed again, and then harder, with a real effort. Like trying to close a door in a
fierce gale, he gasped, though the breeze is no more than middling.
He pushed with both hands and all his weight, and now, very slowly, the blade began to shift. And as it did, so Elof caught his breath, felt Kara's hand tighten suddenly upon his arm. A sudden chill grew in the pit of his stomach. Something else had shifted also. He knew not what, but it felt like the balance of the world. Ilse cried out suddenly and pointed, not to the vane, but to the streamers on the mainstays, the signal flags above. It was hard to see at first, but had they also shifted? Kermorven had released the vane, staggered back. It stayed where he had placed it, as firmly as before. He threw his weight upon it again, and once again the streamers shifted. The flags flapped to a different angle. Elof swallowed.
That's all,
panted the king, releasing the vane and doubling over, hands on knees.
You, Elof, with your thews might shift it a fraction further, but no more.
That's scant surprise, said Ilse a little shakily. To alter the wind at all. Winds are not a single thing, says our lore of weather, but a net of flows and currents, faster than the oceans. To shift one, in a few points, I cannot conceive of it.
Nor I,
muttered Rock.
What have you gone and done this time, my lad?
Elof could only shake his head, feeling like an idiot. Kermorven leaned back against the gunwales, waving off the messengers clamoring for his attention. Abruptly, very much the ruler.
Elof, did you plan this?
He asked with a grim quiet in his voice. Elof drew a deep breath. Kara's hand lay tight upon his shoulder, and somehow that gave him the wit to speak. I planned no more than I said. Now I see it, though. I can see something of how it came about. It is logic of a sort. I sang over it. I whistled old songs of the north to encourage sea luck, fair winds. They are part of me, those songs. They run deep in my memory. They must have drawn more out of me than I guessed. I never dreamed of giving it the power to compel. Kermorven nodded.
I can believe that. It is a startling power, but perhaps also a dangerous one.
My lord, cried one of the messengers suddenly, desperate to be heard. The Dromans are all signaling. The wind has changed. It will serve them now.
In the longships, called another. My lord, we may lose the hour, the tide.
Kermorven snapped to his feet.
Well, he muttered, what that power has already given us, let us not waste.
And cupping his hands to his mouth, he shouted out to his crew.
To your places, all men. Winch cable crews ready. Mainmast men ready. Slip the stern moorings. Hoist the mainsail. Ready the head sails. Bow moorings. Haul in.
Tumult broke out on the main deck, and the shipmaster and his mates came running aft to the stern castle. Kermorven rounded on the messengers with a blast of orders that sent them scurrying to the signal halyards, then back to his own crew.
Do you take command, master. Wrap her around into the wind, mainsail first. Out into the main channel and through. We'll lead them all out.
The shipmaster saluted him, and turned to bellow across the decks. In the bows, a capstan winch began to clank. and they felt the stern swing suddenly free of its moorings. The long hull began to sway and sidle in the choppy harbor waters. The huge mainyard creaked and rumbled up the mast. The hemp-stiffened mainsail fluttered and boomed as the breeze caught it and shook it.
"Keep hauling the bows,"
bellowed the master. Into the wind swung the great ship, and for the space of a breath the mainsail hung limp. Then it was across, and almost at once the wind caught the sail, bellied it out with an explosive crack.
"Lip the moorings, the bows!"
roared the master.
"Helm, steer for the harbor mouth."
The great ship surged forward. The deck leaped under them and then began to dip and raise more smoothly as it gathered way. Behind them, the wheel spun, hauling on the tiller lines that rose up taut through the deck. Kermorven cast a glance at the helmsman, who nodded calmly. This manner of rudder was a new thing, learned from the Duergar, and still unpredictable. But it seemed to be working smoothly enough now. The Prince Cornton nosed her sleek bows out into the main channel, while all around her sails blossomed out among the other ships of the fleet, and their standards dipped in salute. Kermorven gathered up his armor of black and gold from the bench where he had laid it, and moved forward to stand at the rail of the stern castle, proud and resplendent. He wore no helm, and his long locks shone like bronze indeed in the morning sun. From the walls of the palace came a fanfare of trumpets, the call of the garrisons who would remain to defend the town. From tower tops, a loud pealing of bells, and from the shore, a great cheer went up. As ever, all the town had turned out to watch their king and his great fleet depart. He waved, and from the bows his own heralds answered the town's salute. Then, at his command, the rest of his music, gathered by the companionway, struck up a strong and buoyant tune. Like sudden wings, the head sails spread out above. White water swirled at the bows. Kara, still clutching Elof's arm, positively danced with excitement as the great ship swept towards the harbor mouth, its fellows sliding out one by one into its wake in the order the king had laid down. As it glided between the tall towers that flanked the mouth, the music of the other ships took up the tune, and the notes of thundering tabors, shrilling flutes, silver cymbal and brazen horns and trumpets rose and rang around the whole shore of the bay, as their white sails spread out, dazzling against its sparkling waters. Thus, in pride and splendor, that great fleet set forth, and though from shore it must have been no less splendid a sight, no account describes it so. Those who chronicled it were among its numbers. Hard on the flagship's heels the greatest of the dromons came, still spreading its great fields of sail. The creak of ropes, bellowed orders, the dull boom of sailcloth shook the air. Flanking it raced two smaller craft, chase cutters rigged in the strange new patterns derived from Duergar ideas, their sails slanting fore and aft instead of square to the hull. Kara went running to the stern rail to watch them, bouncing and skipping impudently up through the wake like puppies snapping at the ankles of a bull. "They're so beautiful," she breathed. "If we could only sail one of those." Elof laid his arm around her. "There'll be time enough on this voyage. No doubt their crews will be glad of the rest for a day or two. We should ask Kermorven." "Oh, yes," she said, her eyes sparkling like the waters beneath. He felt her quiver from head to toe with excitement. "So fat, so light, so fast. It would be almost like—" But there she stopped herself and said no more. As in previous years, the first few days of the great fleet's voyage were leisurely, more like a ceremonial royal progress than a venture of moment. By day the ships would race each other, or contest in maneuvering and skill, which Glamorgan encouraged for the practice it gave crews and commanders alike. Elof and Kara had their chance then to sail the new rigged cutters. Each night they would anchor in sheltered waters, or the harbors of lesser ports where the king would receive deputations and petitions, settle disputes, and renew acquaintance with those of his people who seldom or never came north to Morvenhall, the city itself. In the remoter areas the fleet was greeted with almost delirious relief, as a living token of the strength and solidarity of the land. The wounds of the Ekwesh occupation, short as it had been, were slow in healing there. Those were pleasant days for most, yet for Elof they were marred. For Kara grew more restive, spoke less, and seldom settled. She would pace the decks, or sit for long hours in the bows, gazing at the empty expanse of the ocean off the port bow. She did not object to his company in such times. She would smile at him as he came to sit by her, perhaps rest her head upon his shoulder, yet ever her gaze was turned away into the void of earth and sky. Once he found her still there in the midst of a storm, clinging to the forestay and squealing with delight as the bows clove the wave crests and showered her with chill spray. He grew angry then, and upbraided her for courting foolish perils. She made no comment, no complaint, but took to climbing, in clement weather, to the lookout's place at the summit of the mainmast. Elof followed her up, admiring the grace of her tanned legs on the rigging above, the animal ease with which she swung herself up onto the narrow platform. Elof bent and struggled through more cautiously, and once he hastily looped his belt through the ring provided. Kara took no such precaution, but leaned out over the rail, rejoicing in the feeling of height and pointing down delightedly to the flocks of dolphins come to race around the fleet's bows. Elof smiled, only a little thinly, and sought to share her joy without looking too often at the deck. He found himself too ready to notice how distant it seemed, and how narrow, how unsteady, heaving wildly back and forth beneath him on a surface of churning green and white. But if he studiously ignored that, the view was worth it, and so was the sense of space after many days cramped and confined aboard ship. He felt a sudden pang of sorrow for Kara. She had come of her own will. She would say nothing. Yet if her life on land was confining, how much worse must this be? "Would you like your cloak back?" he asked impulsively, forgetting his other concerns for now. "Without obligations. So you can—" He shrugged. "Take the air whenever you wish. As you wish." She leaned on the rail, her crisp dark hair ruffled by the wind and tinged with a corona in the clear light, and looked at him speculatively for a while. Then she smiled, shook her head again, and put her head affectionately on his arm. "No need. This is enough for me, to feel the rushing airs and see afar, far. I'll wait till you need me." Elof shrugged again and took her arm, but within himself he felt slightly resentful. She was still paying him back, it seemed. He glanced at her, watching those fierce bird-like eyes, green as the water beneath, flicker this way and that across the vast horizon, and was suddenly glad she had not accepted. What could he have been thinking of? Dislike it though he might, his chosen way would be the safest after all. It was not long after that they passed beyond the southern borders of the realm of Morvenhall, and into the wild, beyond the habitations of men. Yet still it was a rich and wholesome country along the shores, well watered by many rivers, and they were able to land for water and provisions at many anchorages they had charted and explored upon previous voyages. The worst perils here were wild beasts, and an occasional nest of human outlaws many times more savage, ready to sally out and assail any small vessel in difficulties or separated from the body of the fleet. Kermorvan had taken strong measures to guard against this, however, and such attacks were swiftly dealt with. On one occasion, such a straggler was attacked by 2 pirate longboats in fog. Kermorvan brought the Cornton alongside with sweeps and himself led the clearing of its decks. Out of some 30 raiders, no more than 3 escaped him, and that by leaping overboard, swimming for a boat, and rowing frantically off into the shadows. "Were it clear, I would have pursued them in the cutters," he remarked, wiping clean his gray-gold sword. "As it is, let them save their hides, if only for the sake of times past." At last, after some 3 weeks of generally easy sailing, they came to the last of these anchorages and the greatest, a wide river estuary that was of old named Ancarvadoen, the deep roads. Beyond it the coasts became rougher, stonier, dangerous in the approach. No voyage had passed without the loss of one vessel at least along this stretch, many lives. Nor were the lands they guarded any safer. Somewhere at their heart stretched the long arm of the great forest, turning to tangled jungle with its manifold traps and terrors. And Carvadoin was remembered in this uninhabited country chiefly because it was known that the last great band of fugitives from doomed Morven, led by Vade and the Princess Ase, had encamped here through one long winter. On the last voyage, men of the fleet had stumbled upon the traces of that brief settlement, a few overgrown hummocks of dry stone walls, and upon the hill overlooking the estuary, 3 or 4 graves, well marked, but nameless. It was a melancholy place, but Kermorvan wished to land there once more. He had brought with him memorial stones fairly carven for the graves and the ruins. "And may they lay the unquiet spirits of this land," he remarked quietly to Elof, as the 2 of them clambered back down the steep grassy slopes to their shore camp. "For I feel they walk here still, or some memory of their sorrows. Let them learn this, that their suffering was not wholly without result, that the line and heritage of their land lives still, and does not forget them." Elof nodded. "I sense something of what you say, strongly. It is wholesome enough, this land, but overhung with feeling, anguish, sadness, loss, and beneath it anger, rage at the injustice of fate. I have felt it somewhere before, in the hollow bones of Morven the city, perhaps. And not only there. I do not think those stones will assuage it, worthy notion though they were. It does not bode well." "I agree. And in any event, we are on the edge of difficult and dangerous country, and a treacherous coast." He looked at Kara, tripping lightly through the tangled grass where others slipped and stumbled. "I think it is time we called upon your unique gifts, my lady. If you are willing, you could scout out our way on the morrow for many leagues ahead." She looked demurely at her feet. "If Elof is willing, my lord, then, of course." "He does not normally raise any objection," said Kermorvan quizzically, glancing at Elof. "No? Then, whenever it pleases you, my lady." "I'll fetch your cloak from the ship, then, Kara," said Elof, a little self-consciously. "You can be getting something to eat meanwhile." He hurried off, feeling the king's gaze like a cool gust at his back. When his boat came back to the beach, he could see her waiting there for him, a slender silhouette against the glow of the campfires, half hidden against the shadows of the bushes around them. "I have it," he said quietly, stepping up to her, holding out the precious garment. She received it in her outstretched hands, held it, did not put it on. "Kara," he began. "Heart, why the reluctance? Why do you hesitate? Why have you twice refused this already? Is it because... Are you only delaying the moment? Do you think you'll fly away and never come back?" "No!" she hissed, and then more softly, "No, Heart, I will come back. Never fear, but I will come back." He nodded, took the cloak from her hands, and himself draped it around her shoulders. Then he reached into his pocket. "I believe that is what you truly want. But I have brought you a small token, keepsakes. Wear them for me, and you will not forget." Swiftly, he stooped to her ankle, one open band of silver in each powerful hand. He felt the first slide over her cool skin. Then his wrists were seized. Elof was stronger than most men, but he could not move a finger's breadth against the strong, slim fingers that gripped him thus, that drew his hands up and into the light. He saw the glint of silver mirrored in the chill green pools that were Kara's eyes, and to his horror, the shimmering that ran within the silver also, as bright as ever he saw it himself. "Fool!" said a voice of steel he hardly recognized. "Oh, you unalterable fool! Do you think a power had sunk so low in loving a man that it should be blind to the forces within his works? Did you dream I donned your arm ring that day in ignorance of what it would do? That I would not see through this silver of yours as into clear water, and read there what you have set in play? Did you think so little of my life, my existence, to trifle with it thus?" He saw the streaks of silver that coursed her cheeks, and his heart withered within him. I sought only to reinforce our own truest wish, steady you by your own will." The steel broke and burst into flame. "By ensnaring that will, by goading it along the paths you choose." I sought only to embody what I knew you wanted. I set no compulsion of mine in the work." "No more than you would compel the winds. And yet you did, and shackled them with fearful force. Can you not see that you cannot harness any desire of mine? Only as your own eyes see it can you give it form." "But," Elof swallowed, "if it is so close to yours, if it is what you want, then how can it harm you? If you truly love me, how should it mar that?" "How?" She laughed, but not as humans laughed. "By taking away what is most truly mine. How would it harm you to be whipped to breathe, beaten to eat, goaded to love? How would it harm you if Kermorvan drew smithcraft from you by prison and torment, not friendship and honor? Then, my cunning child, my deceitful heart, then you would understand." She lifted his wrists, shook them fiercely before her face, and the rage of Morganon shone there behind the tears. And how would it mar love by forcing it to tread one single path, one circling, spiraling, endless path, never free to change, to grow, to find new ways and new reasons to love. Love of all things. That must change from moment to live. That you would keep for yourself, but never trust me with it. Must I be the same to you in age, when you will not be the same? Be to you then just what I am now, no more, no less? How fine a lover will you find me then? Fool, how fitting company for your cooling blood! Yet to that you would bind me, shackle me in my own imprisoned spirit, encircle me about in the mazes of my own mind. You would deceive me, drive me by my very feelings, just as your damned mind sword drove men by their deepest fears. A sudden shock drove deep into Elof's breast, as cold and breath-devouring as that blade's bite. He clutched at the scar, remembering that older song, that tune that had arisen unbidden from his memory, as it seemed. He knew it now, knew the first words he had ridden upon its rising fervor. As sundered I found you in flickering flame, as once then I bound you, I bind you again. Over the mind sword, embodiment of command, compulsion, driving by terror, over the last completion of that unhallowed weapon, on the fixing of its cutting edge, he had sung that song. And he had sung it again over the instrument of his love. A new flood of fury filled her, overflowed in tears. And the risk? How could you? What if those anklets had closed, other than on me? What then? And if they were ever opened again? You, who broke Louhi's fetters on me. How I loved you for that. And then you sought to fetter me within myself. Now, Elof wept also, as he had not even in childhood. Tears of shame and rage and scalding self-disgust. His own vast folly billowed up before him like a banner of blackness, and blindly he reached out to her through its enveloping folds. Tara, I see now, If he could reach her, hold her, tell her how much he had been at fault, then she might still forgive him. His hand clutched at her arm, closed around metal over warm skin. Don't touch me! She screamed, and with that astonishing strength she jerked away her arm. The metal caught in his desperate fingers. He felt it bend and break. Then the darkness seemed blasted from his eyes, and he was staring at her, and she at him, wide-eyed with shock, unsteady on her feet. She was holding her arm as if injured. On the dark grass between them a shard of gold gleamed, a curved, distorted shape, and from between her fingers a broken end gleamed. The serpentine arm ring of gold, Elof's first great work. His first gift to her and sign of hope between them had broken in two. She stumbled back a pace, and even as he reached out to her once again, she threw back her head and screamed aloud, a terrible shriek of grief and despair that echoed out around hill and water like the feelings that haunted them given fearful voice. All in that camp or aboard the ships, awake or sleeping, it brought instantly to their feet, hearts pounding, ridden by fear beyond thought and reason. Before those who had seen them, the empty wastes of town law opened out once more, the withered lands, so the winds might cry there, with the voice of the imprisoned dead. So they might have stirred the cloak about her, so billowed it forth to reveal its inner blackness. Shadow enveloped her. She sprang and vanished. Wings of shadow beat upward into the night. With a cry of horror, Elof snatched the Tarnhelm from his belt and clapped it on his head. The cry changed in mid-breath to the scream of an eagle, and into the heights he soared in her pursuit. There was starlight enough over the ocean for his keen eyes to pick out the black swan flying seaward, high and straight, never wheeling, never turning. After her he sped, feeling his wings bite into the wind. His keen head crested it like a speeding swimmer. Yet she flew fast, that strange creature, and even in seconds she had a lead on him he would find hard to break. And time was on her side. Far into the night they flew, till the land was no more than a streak of shadow far behind. Elof had looked back once, and dared do so no more, for the distance it had cost him. He was no nearer now than at the first, and already he could feel himself tiring, his masked form yearning for the lineaments of a man once more. Never once did he see her neck turn. Did she even know she was being followed? So fast, so straight she flew, it made little difference. He had no voice to call her, and the call of his heart was emptiness. He had betrayed her, and brought about what he had most dreaded. What more could he do for her now but fly in her path till he reached its limits, or those of his failing strength? One way or another, he would find an end. How far he flew, he never remembered, or for how long. But at some point, some shred of sanity must have asserted itself, for his friends of the fleet found him at last, in the small hours of the morning, sprawled face down and soaking upon the tidal sands of Ancarvadoin. They feared him dead at first, but he breathed, and in one hand the Tarnhelm was clutched, with a grip they could not break.